Good Monday morning, everyone. Here is a copy of our Lodge, Haru Raha Lodge periodical, our journal. Oh yes. Now we call it, I know it's pronounced Oye, as in hear ye all or attention. But because we're boorish Americans, we called it Oyez fondly. And this one is from spring of 1983. And that's the information there. This is a drawing by our lodge member, David P. Wilson, who in later life would write and publish as S. Jason Black of Urban Voodoo fame and all sorts of other things, especially with the New Falcon Press. What's that, dear?
Oh, I was just thinking of the other thing.
Oh, she was thinking of the other things. He's quite a character. He's no longer with us. But anyway, he did the covers for many of our Oyezes. And long about 1979, we started, well, even probably earlier than that, but in 1979, during our weekly lodge class, we had, I think it was a Thursday night class in those days, we started experimenting with Enochian magic. And when I say experimenting, I really mean experimenting. Think about it. In 1979, no one else was doing it that we were aware of on the planet. And we had very little to published material to work with. And during our early efforts, we even had to resort to photocopies provided on microfiche or microfilm from the British Library of the original D material, and it came in rolls of that heat sensitive copy paper that felt creepy. I don't know, thermal paper, okay? And we had to read it and go through it and then photocopy it, because that thermal paper in like a couple of weeks started to turn brown and then gray and then just crumble in your hands. So it was very spooky stuff. Anyway, we didn't have much to work with, but what we did have was enough for us young fools to start practicing. And we were encouraged and somewhat discouraged by the advice of Dr. Rigarde, who was somewhat alarmed that I had made the tablets in 3 dimensions. And he said, they're dangerous enough when they're flat. And talking about the tablets. And I said, well, maybe they're dangerous when they're flat because they're all crabby because they're pinched down like that. Anyway, we were absolutely blessed, if that's the word we could use with talking about David Wilson. David was a fantastic, amazing scryer. He was rich in visual images and could fall easily into trance state. And he made the perfect scryer in sort of a Golden Dawn group situation where one magician acts as an operator and the other one acts as a scryer. And we discovered early on that probably in late or early 1979, we discovered quite accidentally his scrying ability. Anyway, by 1982, in June of 1982, after many months of working with the elemental tablets, we started out with the seniors on each of the 4 elemental tablets, but we had avoided using the tablet of union or the spirit tablet because of something that we misread in Crowley's comments about the tablet of union being the source of all the mischief. Well, it was a turn of phrase and not really a warning. But anyway, we avoided it. So it was one of the last things that we encountered. But once we discovered the amazingness of the elemental tablet of the tablet of union, we focused exclusively on that for over a year, and especially because we found it had the master angel of the elemental tablet of union had a real knack for describing people's previous incarnations. But that's another story. By 1983, spring of 1983, when it was time for our quarterly lodge journal, we decided to focus primarily upon the Enochian material. And there's other things in here and other articles. But and look, I was using a typewriter, an old IBM typewriter, and we had to publish this. We had an old multi-lith printing press in the garage, a real live with ink and metal plates that we made in the bathroom, and it was very medieval. Okay, but anyway, Enochian magic, where to start? And look what was only available in those days. Equinox Volume 1, numbers 5 and 6, Gems from the Equinox, if you didn't have all of that, The Golden Dawn, and you needed time to read and reread Enochian material from these sources. Questions raised in one source will usually be answered in the other, and I tell you, it takes some digging to do that. The system is simpler than it looks at first. Perseverance brings good fortune. You should have the Enochian Dictionary by Laycock and A True and Faithful Relation. All of that was almost available. And there's the stuff from the British Library that we're working with too. Anyway, for that article, this is pretty much how I explain it. There's 2 branches, elemental watchtowers of the universe and the Tablet of Union, and then there's the 30 Aethers, and I describe all of that. And there's a bit of stuff there, and I print out the first and second call and all 4 of the elemental tablets and the Tablet of Union And let's see, and that's just right out of the equinox. We were just blatantly, because no one else was doing anything like that. And there's the Tablet of Union, the angelic letters. Okay. And temple opening. But what I really want to do today is read the article by David Wilson. And we called our Monday Night Magic class Enochian Workings, we called it the Guild of Enochian Studies, or GOES. I rambled on enough. I'm going to read it anyway. What's that, dear?
Because we were pretentious.
Okay. The EHNB workings. Now, EHNB, I'm just going to digress for a second here. EHNB is the spirit column of the Tablet of Union. So that's the E of X-Harp, the H of Hakma, the N of Nanta, and the B of Batum. So if X-Harp, Hakma, Nanta, Batum were the equivalent of the archangels of Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, and Uriel, then EHNB would be the archangel of archangels, a big freaking spirit. Okay, as I started to do. This is David Wilson now. During June of last year, after we had been experimenting with the Enochian system regularly for little more than a year, it was suggested by Lon that we try an evocation of the EHNB line of the Spirit Board. That's how he referred to the Tablet of Union, as the Spirit Board, which, according to the way the system was designed, would call up a being composed evenly of all four elements plus the element of spirit. In other words, a microcosmic being like man himself, rather than an elemental angel such as was supposed to respond to the calls and the names of the four tablets. That's kind of a broad generality there. But remember, we're kids. We're kids doing this in 1982. Constance was younger, even.
I was grown up.
You were dumber?
I was grown up.
Oh, Constance was grown up. That's true. She's been grown up since she was born. Well, maybe not, but you've been wise. Things were set up in the living room, with a small altar in the center of the room containing elemental weapons and the spirit board. People were seated around the room, with myself in an overstuffed chair facing the altar. It was always my policy to make myself as physically comfortable as possible during a scrying, preferably in a seated position from which I would not have to move during the ceremony, since success has always hinged on my being able to achieve some sort of trance state. I might add that I'm always straight, meaning he's not stoned. That's how we talked in those days. David was hardly straight. Okay. Let's see. Since success always hinged on me, okay. I might add that I had always been straight during these sessions, and at the same time, hang on for a second, and the same holds true of the spontaneous experiences mentioned later. I think this is important because Crowley's writings and the general attitude of the membership tends to take it for granted that some kind of intoxicant is an aid to this kind of work. And having tried it both ways, my experience has been emphatically the opposite. In any case, the ceremony was opened with a pentagram and banishing and greater hexagram ritual, both performed by Lon at my request. He also did the opening of the temple and the first 2 keys, which I was originally set to do, but by this time I was sinking into an unusually deep trance state and felt that any kind of movement would ruin it. Any good hypnotic subject will probably know what I was feeling at that moment. A sense of weightlessness and disassociation from my body. I literally felt as though I was spinning head over heels on some carnival ride. Up to this point, none of this was unusual, although it was unusually deep. At this point, however, Lon had begun to read the first key, and my sensations steadied, although I still felt light as a feather. Then suddenly, what I can only describe as waves of ecstasy began rising from my feet to the top of my head. While there was nothing sexual about this feeling, I can honestly say it was as good as the best orgasm I had ever experienced. Better, in a sense, because the feeling didn't stop. When this started happening, I saw, my eyes were closed, I saw a hand with an outstretched finger pointing to a sign on a piece of parchment resting on a table. When this image came to me, my forehead got an intense, cold, buzzing sensation right where the third eye is located, and my right arm went dead. Not just asleep, but totally dead, as though it wasn't there. All this occurred before Lon had even finished the first call, and I informed him of this, but we went on with the second key and the name, EHNB, in order to make sure we had gotten what we'd wanted and not some uninvited guest. After this was done, the vision didn't change, and I felt no sense of uneasiness, so we proceeded. The vision expanded to show me a tall, sardonic-looking man dressed in close-fitting robe of patterned red velvet and standing beside an ornate table of dark wood with a variety of obscure implements and containers on it, some of which could have been made by Cellini, Cellini. The outstretched hand was wearing a ring with a very large dark red stone in it, which was to be the spirit's only stable article of costume and in subsequent workings. He was standing in a circular room with rather gothic-looking windows around it, and a large circular opening in the center of the floor, and a smaller one directly above it in the domed ceiling. Lon proceeded with the usual questions to the spirit, to discover its nature, functions, etc., and in the usual fashion it responded with signs, visions, tarot images, something new in this case, and I Ching hexagrams. All this rigmarole was necessary because while I'm a good clairvoyant, I tend to be lousy at hearing voices. The second, and for me, major surprise of the evening came when the spirit was asked the correct pronunciation of its name. A question that applied to elementals usually draws a reaction of puzzlement at the concept. Well, I was about to dismiss the question when I got a strong chill up my spine, and for the first time, and only time, I got a flash of mediumship in the literal, accepted sense of the term. My mouth began to move, and I began babbling incoherently at first, something that started out sounding like a baby's gurgle, and then the words came out clearly and were repeated several times. Enlil ben ha. Enlil ben ha. I was kind of amused by this whole thing. Sitting there feeling rather like I was coming down from laughing gas with my body half numb and some outside force taking over my mouth and talking baby talk. But my attitude changed when someone else present began asking the question. So this wasn't me asking. It was a class member. Who is your father? He's at the top of a peak surrounded by 7 thrones, I answered. And so on very briefly to the deep satisfaction of the questioner and my equally deep puzzlement. The session was rounded out with a look into the hole in the center of the chamber floor and a request by Lon to manifest visually to all people present. This produced not only visual manifestation, but an identical feeling in the third eye area of 8 of the 10 people present. After this, Lon closed and vanished. I tried to recover use of my limbs after more than an hour in deep trance than I had ever experienced. When the general mulling about had stopped, there was some discussion about what had happened, and I learned the rationale behind some of the, to me, off-the-wall questions that had been asked of the spirit. The participant who had taken over the questioning from Lon during my speaking in tongues told me that the name Enlil ben ha was an ancient Sumerian phrase which meant son of the god of earth, or son of Enlil. I need hardly remark that I'm not familiar with ancient Sumerian and only dimly with the name of Enlil. My interests have always been in Greek mythology, so it's unlikely that I could have easily dragged the name out of some childhood memory. The name that I gave for the spirit prompted his next question: who was your father? And my answer regarding the mountain peak with 7 thrones around it matched perfectly with the legendary home of the god in question, the North Pole, surrounded by 7 stars of the Pleiades, which I believe is mentioned somewhere in Kenneth Grant's writings, but I cannot recall where. A piece of information I found to be, if possible, more obscure than the name. Whatever the source of the name, the spirit has been thought of and responded to the name Enlil ben ha ever since. EHNB, Enlil ben ha. From this point of success, we worked with his spirit almost to the exclusion of anything else for almost a year. During this work, the spirit displayed idiosyncrasies of personality and independence of behavior and responses beyond anything I've ever experienced in evocation. It also was the source of such phenomena as telepathy, clairvoyance, poltergeist activity, physical changes in my metabolism, spontaneous astral experiences, and sometimes scaring the shit out of me. It also caused serious thought on my part about the objective nature of at least some phenomena. This will be covered along with some tentative conclusions in the second part of this article in the next issue of Oyez. So, that's a very young David Wilson writing in about experiments with a very young Lon and Constance and members of the weekly magic class of Haru Raha Lodge. And actually, there was enough information here, including the temple openings and the first and second calls and the tablets for the readers of this back in those days to actually perform that experiment themselves. And I don't like to use the word experiment because that means you do something just to see what happens. And where magic is concerned, you do something because at least you perceive it's your will that something be done. And with that, we'll close our Monday exposition. See you tomorrow. Continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. I don't know if Constance is in the kitchen, but I'll say, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Stay with me. Love is the law, love is the will.
See you tomorrow.